So how much ammo should you have on hand? Well, let's consider. How much ammo should you have on hand for home defense?
These two men try to break the door down. After the sixth try, the door's open, but they're scared off by...
How much ammo should you have on hand for community defense? Things like a civilian response to an active shooter.
Chilling new video has surfaced of the deadly airport attack in Fort Lauderdale.
What about how much ammo should you have on for mob violence, for things like these? And in the worst possible case scenario, how much ammo should you have on hand for war?
Mike's down, sights down.
All right, everybody, many people have asked the question, how much ammo should you have on hand, or how much ammo should you store? And I want to give you a real-world answer based on a common sense formula that you can use to determine how much ammo you need to have on hand. Now, as you figure out this common sense approach, it's going to be based on the given possible scenarios that you would fall into that you would need ammo. You already know you need guns. And if you haven't seen the video I posted on the 3 guns that you need to own now, that link is in the description, and I would suggest you watch that video. But ammo storage could be calculated on the basis of 5 different scenarios. The first being home defense, the second being community defense, or preparing for an active shooter, or some other small-scale weapons engagement. Then there's the ever-increasing possibility of mob violence, number 3. And then number 4, there's always the potential that we have to prepare for war, but we hope that never happens, and let's pray that it doesn't. And then number 5, total apocalypse, which you won't be prepared for anyway, even if you have the most ammo or you're an ammo manufacturer. So forget about that one. So for all intents and purposes, if we prepare for the worst, which in our case, we're ruling out the apocalypse because your guns won't do you any good, but we prepare for war and we get less than that, then we'll always be prepared. And so let's talk about a war-type preparation and what ammo you should realistically have on hand to prepare yourself for any and all situations that you would need firearms and ammo for use in a defensive or offensive situation. So before we get into the meat of the video, if you like video content like this and you want to help this channel, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell notification so you get notified when any content like this gets put up. All right, so now if we use the war scenario to calculate ammunition, and that'll give us enough ammunition on hand that we can prepare for any of the other scenarios that we talked about, we come up with a good common sense formula. And the way that formula works is this way. You have a primary weapon, and you have a secondary weapon, and then you have specialty weapons. So talking about war and a full combat loadout, we're going to talk about a primary weapon and a secondary weapon. And that will be like your AR-15s or your AK-47s or other reliable military-capable rifles. And then your secondary weapon, which would be your pistol or your handgun, your sidearm. And then when we talk about specialty weapons, those would apply to unique situations that might be used for portions of an engagement or portions of an operation, but they're not going to be used primarily or secondarily, and so they're specialty weapons. In our case, moving down the scenario list from war all the way down to home defense, we would be talking about things like sporting rifles, shotguns, flamethrowers, and Laws rockets. Maybe not, but you get the idea. Specialty weapons. So that's the weapon rundown that we're going to use to come up with our formula and our common sense approach to ammo storage. Primary weapon system, secondary weapon system, and specialty weapon system. So for this example, we're taking our worst case scenario being war. So if we look back into history of our country and we look at, say, hey, the Civil War, it lasted a little over 4 years. We're going to use a 4-year multiple for everything that we come up with for our primary, our secondary, and our specialty weapon systems. So what we're going to do is take the primary loadout, the secondary loadout, and a specialty loadout, and we're going to figure out an annual amount that you would want to have on hand, and then we'll multiply that by 4, and that should be what you're preparing for, minimally, to have yourself prepared for any weapons engagement that you might encounter, and that'll give you a good basis to work from. Now, this does not include training ammunition. I train about once a week, and most of my training right now is with small arms, with particularly my concealed carry weapon. Now, for this example, we're going to use an AR-15 as our primary weapon system, and what you want to have with your AR-15 is you want to have a full combat loadout. And so what you're looking at is having 7 AR mags ready to go. And this is 6, 1 in the gun. And you'd want to have that on hand, already in the magazines, and ready to use if any of those scenarios present themselves to you. You would be ready for it with 7 full-size magazines. So that's going to be 30 rounds times 7, 210 rounds, and we will just round up to 250 to make nice even numbers. And so you would want 250 rounds available to you for a combat engagement that would use your primary weapon system. So again, we're talking about a war type scenario, and then anything under that you would be prepared for. So you're talking about 250 rounds for your primary weapon system, and the way we're going to use the multiple, we're going to multiple by 4 years, but how many can we figure annually? And I just broke that up into quarters because worst case scenario, if you have one weapons engagement where you need 250 rounds of ammo, and that takes place once a quarter, you're in some really, really bad stuff. And so best case scenario, minimal loadout, we're talking about a full combat load for your primary weapon system, 250 rounds a quarter. So you're looking at 1,000 rounds annually, 4,000 rounds on hand of AR-15 for this example. In my case, you would want to have 4,000 rounds on hand for your primary weapon system, and that would last you out 4 years, undoubtedly. And if, like I said, if you go over that, you're into some bad, bad stuff, and we're in an all-out possible civil war, and then you're going to have other ammunition storage come into play, where arms companies and things like that, manufacturers, would undoubtedly be on your side, hopefully, and then you would have access to more ammunition that's needed than what you have personally stockpiled. So that's what I focus on and try to have on for my primary weapon system, 4,000 rounds, and that does not include training ammunition. And so you want to factor in how much you want to train, whether you train once a week, once a month, once a quarter, and on that particular primary weapon system. All right, now let's talk our secondary weapon system. And for this example, I'm going to be talking about the Glock 19X. This will be my preferred secondary weapon system in this configuration with a drop leg holster for anything above community defense. And so when you're talking about mob violence or war, I would prefer that as my secondary weapon system, and I would not be worried about concealment in that instance in mob violence or war type violence. Now for either home defense or community defense, either I'm in my house or I'm out and about and I am carrying my everyday concealed carry. Glock 19 is my preference there. It's just a little bit shorter in the handle, which is the single greatest consideration when it comes to concealment. And so I would prefer this for those home defense situations, car defense, and or community defense, such as active shooter response or something like that, where I knew I could not employ my primary weapon system and I would want to have the advantage of concealment, where I can engage the threat, reconceal, engage a threat, and if necessary, reconceal, and that way I don't project to any potential multiple bad guys that I'm a good guy carrying a weapon. And so we're going to work off those two, the Glock 19X and the Glock 19. 15 rounds, standard mags versus 17 rounds. We're just going to round up in this case. But you would want to have 3 to 4 full magazines for your secondary loadout. And so if you took 15 for ease of numbers, you're talking about 60 rounds as a full loadout. And if you did that once a quarter, you're talking about 60 times 4, just 240 rounds. If you just round that up to 250 and you multiply by 4 years, we're talking about 1,000 rounds of secondary weapon ammunition that you would want to have on hand, and you would be prepared for any and all situations that would come your way for a 4-year period. Now that does not include training ammunition. And ideally, in your secondary weapon system, and I know it's expensive, but you want to carry what you need to shoot for self-defense, and that's self-defense rounds. And that gets quite expensive, and so you want to build that up over time. And then, of course, you'll need your regular training ammunition, your full metal jacket, ball ammunition for training scenarios. So that takes us through our primary weapon system and our secondary weapon system. Hopefully you're getting those figures. I will put them in the description below so that you can have access to those numbers. Now let's talk about specialty weapon systems and how we calculate those loadouts. Specialty weapons are situational dependent. You can talk about specialty weapons as being something needed in a pinch to maybe make up for a deficiency in the primary or the secondary weapon system. So for instance, a shotgun in breaching or something of that nature, or survival type situations where your AR or your pistol doesn't excel in a hunting type situation and you're in a survival situation where you may need to hunt some animals for food. You may want a shotgun with birdshot, or you may want a Ruger 1022, as we talked about in the 3-gun video that I put in the description below. Again, if you haven't seen that video, go check that out for the 3 guns that you'll want to own now. But specialty weapons are just that. So specialty weapon loadout like the 20 gauge shotgun that I use, as for an example, it holds 4+1, so a total of 5 rounds. And for specialty applications that I would want to have on hand, that were going to be one of the self-defense scenarios that we talked about, not including my sporting activities, not including practice or training, I would want to have 3 full loadouts in each one of the shell sizes. So I would want to have 15 rounds at least on hand for that one engagement. And if I was talking about 1 weapon engagement per quarter annually, then I would want to multiply that by 4. And so I would have 60 rounds annually. And if I was talking about being prepared for 4 years, I would want 240, let's just say 250 rounds of specialty ammunition. Considering it's a shotgun, I would want to have 250 rounds of that 20 gauge slug on hand, buckshot on hand, birdshot anywhere from number 2s down to number 5 or 6. And that would be a sufficient minimal storage quantity that I would be happy with for a specialty weapons system. Now, when it comes to .22 long rifle, the ammunition is so cheap relative to other ammunitions, even though it's more expensive now than it was before. You can literally afford to buy thousands and thousands of rounds of that, and that's what I have. I don't really calculate that loadout because I use it so much for small game hunting and plinking and things like that. I just make sure I have thousands and thousands of rounds on hand for that because I use it so often and I like the gun so much. And so if you have thousands of rounds on hand for it, you are good to go, no calculations necessary because it's just so cheap. It's not something you really have to plan and calculate for to have on hand. So ideally, that's all what you want to have on hand for your primary weapon system, your secondary weapon system, and any specialty weapons that you might think you need for those scenarios on into the future. Again, let me know how your numbers would differ for your primary, your secondary, or your specialty. Let me know how you would change up that formula, or why you feel you might need more or less on hand, and what you think about this common sense approach to ammo storage and how much ammo you should have prepared. And please, if you like this information and you want to help this channel, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification so that you can be notified whenever we put out more content like this. As always, I want to thank you for making the choice to defend yourself and those you love. God bless you and yours.